Hello and welcome to this presentation on different strategies for classroom and behavior management in preschool. Thank you guys for joining me. And so today we're going to be talking a lot about how we prevent behavioral challenges in the classroom and also how do we manage them when they actually occur. Um, a lot of, if you want to think about as we move forward, we're going to be really breaking this down into preventative strategies and management strategies. So I really like this quote because what this is all about is teaching, and that's what you guys are doing here today, and that's what you're going to be doing this year. I really like this. So if a child doesn't know how to read, what do? We teach. If a child doesn't know how to swim, what do? We teach. If a child doesn't know how to multiply, well, once again, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to drive, we teach. So a child who can't behave, how do we fix that? We teach. Because a lot of times we get caught into this mindset that the children are bad or they're not being good or whatever, and we have to remember that these kids who are coming to these classrooms come from all walks of life, from all environments, from all experiences. And what I mean by that is that some come from great homes, some come from not so great homes, some have really good models for what is appropriate behavior, and some not so good models. And so if a child doesn't understand how to behave in a certain situation, it's not that they're bad. It's not that there's something wrong with them. They have learned how to behave that way. So we can teach them how to behave more appropriately to improve their chances of learning, improve their behavior, and whatnot. So I really like this pyramid model. I've shown this before in previous presentations, but I really do like this model. I'm a very visual learner, and so I hope you find this as helpful as I do. This pyramid model is a conceptual framework of evidence-based practices promoting young children's healthy social and emotional development. The model, if you look at the model is supported by a really strong foundation. And what the foundation is the systems and policies that the administration put in place help to ensure that each teacher has at their disposal what they need to teach the children what they need to move on to learn the skills that they need, the academic skills, the social emotional skills, the social skills. And so the foundation is basically the policies that drive all of the education that occurs in Head Start. The next tier is the high quality supportive environments and nurturing and responsive relationships. Out to the side, you see it says 80% of children. 100% of children will receive this level of support. All kids who enter Head Start should have high quality supportive environments and nurturing and responsive relationships. And so 100% of kids will need this, but 80%, that's all they'll need. As you move up to targeted social emotional support, you see 10 to 15% of children will need more than just the typical high quality supportive environment and responsive relationships. So they'll need some targeted emotional supports. Now, there's a very small subset of kids that may need more intensive intervention. And so this is where we get into more chronic, challenging behaviors, those behaviors that are more severe and the teacher may need to seek consultation for these types of supports. It's a really good model. It's a really good visualization of how this process is supposed to work. And so I'm going to talk about the different levels as I go. So one question that we get is, do these things that we go over every year, do they work? The research is pretty clear that yes, they do work. research suggests that children whose teachers use pyramid techniques, all of which we'll be talking about in the next part of the presentation, the teachers that use these pyramid techniques were rated significantly higher on social skills than children whose teachers did not. So when teachers use these skills, children have better social skills. But even more importantly, that children who had difficulties in behaviors, when they started this research, they had some kids that had some more challenging behaviors at the beginning of school. So when they engaged in these pyramid type techniques, children who had these difficulties had noteworthy reductions in problematic behavior as rated by the teachers in comparison to those teachers who did not use these specific techniques. So yes, the research is pretty clear. Using these techniques can work. Now, are they going to work in every situation? No, but in general, if you use these preventative and these management strategies that we'll talk about, you're going to have more success. You're going to have children who have better social skills, children who have better emotional skills and emotional regulation skills, but also have less problematic behavior. So a lot of this presentation comes from this website that you see here. I'll give you a second to write it down. But this is a really great resource. They have all sorts of checklists that you can use. They have a whole bunch of handouts that can provide strategies and things to assist your teachers in managing the classroom, setting up the classroom for promoting social emotional development in these kids. I'm looking at one right now sitting in front of me. There's a handout that's titled Helping Children Learn to Manage Their Own Behavior. There's another one, Helping Children Express Their Wants and Needs. I'm also looking at a checklist that teachers could use. You can print it out. And this checklist is called the Checklist of Early Childhood Practices that Support Social Emotional Development. So there's lots and lots of resources on this website, and a lot of the material from this presentation does come directly from this website. So I highly encourage you to take a picture with your phone, write the website down, and go through the website because it is phenomenal in terms of its material. So look at these examples. We have paying attention, we have following teacher directions, we have getting along with others, we have controlling negative or unwanted emotions. What are these examples of? You can say it to yourself, what are these examples of? Well, for those that said that these are examples of behaviors that you will see in the classroom, you're exactly right. And so it kind of begs the question, then if we're going to be talking about how to manage behavior, how to prevent certain behaviors, we have to understand, well, what is behavior? What is behavior? And how do we understand what behavior is? Because in order to change something and to address anything, we have to have some level of understanding about it. So that's why I like having this brief discussion about, well, what is behavior? Well, behavior is any action that could be directly observed. Now, when I've given this presentation in the past in person, I've had lots of teachers, when I ask that question, what is behavior? A lot of times I get, well, kicking, screaming, hitting. Well, behavior is any action, not just those challenging behaviors or the negative things that kind of disrupt learning. So we want to think, and we want to kind of get in our brain that behavior is not necessarily inherently bad or good, because behavior serves a purpose. And we'll talk a good bit about, well, what's the purpose of that behavior? Because if a child is crying or even tantruming, that's not necessarily bad, because maybe in a certain environment, that's how they get their wants and needs met. Well, in another environment like the classroom, that may not be completely appropriate. We have to think that that's not necessarily bad. It just is a behavior that they've learned to get their wants and needs met. So that brings me to the next slide. Behavior always communicates a message. Um, and so behavior is often used instead of language by a child who has limited social skills or limited experiences or have learned that challenging behavior will result in their wants and needs getting met. So behavior doesn't have a whole lot to do with language. But if a child doesn't have language, their behavior can be more challenging because they have learned that without language, they have to use behavior. And so we have to look at that and we have to consider that. And there you'll have a presentation on including children with special needs. You're going to have a child that may be developmentally delayed in some way. And so understanding that these techniques that we're going to go over are all designed not with language in mind. Because they can be used on children with developmental delays, but they can also be used with children who are typically developing. So if we have behavior, well then what does it mean to have challenging behavior? Challenging behavior is any repeated pattern of behavior that interferes with learning or prevents the child from engaging in pro-social interactions with peers and adults. Another way to think about challenging behavior, what oftentimes is associated with challenging behavior is emotion. Rarely is a child tantruming or crying without an underlying emotion. So it's also a way to understand challenging behavior is also having to do with how we regulate or how the child regulates their emotions. So any challenging behavior is a repeated pattern. One time is not considered necessarily challenging. Especially if the child learns, oh, that behavior is not appropriate and changes their behavior. But this is any repeated pattern of behavior that interferes with learning or interferes with engagement in pro-social interactions. Behaviors that are not responsive to the use of developmentally appropriate guidance oftentimes can be lumped into this idea of challenging behaviors. Prolonged tantrums would be an example. Physical or verbal aggression, disruptive vocal or motor behavior, so screaming, certainly property destruction, non-compliance. These kinds of things can be significantly disruptive in the classroom, but more importantly, it interferes with learning. If a child is engaging this constantly throughout the day, these behaviors impact their ability to be present and to learn. So what I want to do is I want to watch this video. There is two little sections on this video. And the first is one that a child becomes aggressive during a play activity. But the second one is the one I want to really focus on. Because when we're looking at preventative and management strategies, I really want you to look at what all could be going wrong in this video, in this example. So we're going to go ahead and play this video.
Look, I bring you a ladder. Wow, that's a trap. No, it's not a trap. It's called a ladder. You're okay. No, they are not hats. They're hunting.
Shelby, go Put the dinosaur.
I'm going to come from
Shelby Lauren, what would you like to press?
I like to
Sit on your bottom, on your bottom, on your bottom, on your bottom. Do you want to sit in the center? There's your name. You can sit and I'll come to you. No. Bye-bye, dinosaur. I'll put him in blocks by your teacher. Let's go. Let's go. I'm going to put it. Do not hit me. I'll put him in blocks. Please, Thompson, where would you like to go?
So I really like this video because it really illustrates how difficult it can be to be a teacher in the preschool classroom. This looks very similar to a lot of classrooms that I've seen, and so you can see there was a lot going on for that teacher, and not only did you see non-compliance, you saw fighting between two children, you saw a child hit the teacher. You saw the teacher engage the child in a less than warm way. Lots of problems in this video. And so what we can do is, what I want to do is, I want to talk about how to prevent and manage these, and become and have an understanding of how we address all of these kinds of things so we can prevent them, so we don't have a classroom that kind of looks like this. That we do not want that, for sure. So as we saw in the video, children engaging in challenging behavior, they do it because it works for them. They oftentimes will do challenging behavior to gain access to something or to someone. They also could be avoiding something or someone. And so that's what we saw in that video. We saw some children who were engaging in hitting behavior. The two boys sitting at the table hit each other because one he wanted to avoid the other kid messing with him with the dinosaur. There was another child the teacher kept going over and bringing back to the table. Well, that child was avoiding something. Maybe it was a activity or something like that. And so these challenging behaviors, they do it because it works for them. And so now how do we not have that classroom? How do we prevent ourselves from being in that situation of that poor teacher? And so there are really two ways that I've mentioned. We want to prevent the behavior, and we want to manage the behavior. We call them preventative strategies and management strategies. So preventative strategies are those that are used before a specific behavior occurs. So it's the precursor, right? So if we can prevent all behavior problems in the classroom, that would be ideal. Man, can you imagine the classroom without any behavior problems? It would be like heaven almost. And so another thing is management strategies. But we also have to realize that these there are going to be behavior issues in the classroom from time to time. Hopefully the frequency, the intensity are low, but sometimes they're impossible to prevent. And so management strategies are used when the behavior is happening at the moment. How do we deal with the behavior? And so I do want to make a disclaimer at this point. Anytime we are using strategies and talking about strategies, I'm going to try to talk about them in a more global sense. I can't say, okay, here are the 5 things that you need in your classroom, the 5 things that you need to do to prevent all behavior problems, because those 5 strategies don't actually work. And what I mean by that is you have to tailor the strategies that you're going to use to your classroom. It does no good for me to say, oh, do these 5 things, because if you turn around and you implement them and they don't work, you're going to kind of be like, well, that guy didn't know what he was talking about. These strategies, as I mentioned, are research-based. They're evidence-based. They do work if you do them consistently. And so it's going to give you the probability of a really well-run classroom. But one specific strategy may not work for one specific child. And so we have to understand that these strategies are more broad, and if we do multiple strategies at once, it gives us the best opportunity to teach these kids the information that they need, to teach them both academic skills, but also social emotional skills. So That's why I pointed you to that website, because it has strategy after strategy after strategy. But like I said, my this presentation is going to be really more broad in how these different activities that you can do will help reduce the number, frequency, intensity of problematic behavior in the classroom. I want to mention the pyramid one last time, because if you really think about preventative and management strategies, they fall within the pyramid. Typically, if the reason why we have policies and procedures from administration is that they have shown to prevent problematic behaviors in the classroom. But if we also use high quality supportive environments and nurturing responsive relationships, those are part of the preventative strategies. The management strategies are more targeted social emotional supports, that third tier. And then the final tier, of course, is the intensive interventions, those that you'll have to seek outside help to develop. And that top tier is really for, 5% of the kids that you'll have in your classroom that may have more chronic challenging behaviors. So preventative and management strategies can be overlaid on this pyramid. Okay, so some preventative strategies. High quality supportive environments is one way to prevent, to create the environment in the classroom that promotes social emotional learning, social learning, peer interaction, but also learning that your teacher, as a child, the teacher is someone who is warm and supportive. So high quality supportive environments can go a long way to prevent challenging behaviors in the classroom. So too can nurturing and supportive relationships. So let's get into what these look like. So classroom design is something that can be really utilized on the front end as you're setting up your classroom in the next week or two. As you're setting up your classroom, designing effective classroom environments can include things like the actual physical arrangement. So for example, we want the kids to be able to easily move around the classroom. And so if things are too tight and they can't move, that may, and if maybe their kids now are too, packed in, well, then maybe we can rearrange some of the structures in the classroom to give them a little bit more space. And so these physical arrangement of the classroom can help increase appropriate behaviors, especially as engagement. And we'll see that in a little bit, how engaging activities can really reduce any probability of challenging behaviors. So, the classroom design, like not only the specific structure and the physical arrangement, but also the actual activities that you're doing. So how does circle time go? The free play, how does centers go? How you design those things and those transitions from one activity to another is part of this idea of classroom design. Because, if we have we'll talk about transitions in a little bit. But designing effective classroom environments also includes structuring interpersonal climate. When I've done observations in the past, you can tell there is a kind of climate or feeling you get when you walk into a classroom. And the ones that are more structured and organized, have really good physical arrangements, have really good structured activities for the kids to do, and there is this air about this climate in the classroom that's welcoming and inviting. But then I've been in classrooms that weren't as organized, didn't have very good classroom designs. Transitions were less than ideal, and the climate was a little bit more icky or difficult to sit in. The volume of the classroom was extremely loud. And I do understand that we're talking about, preschoolers. They're gonna be loud. But there's a one sense of being really loud, and then there's one sense of being really loud, but then not engaged in learning. And so classroom design can be really, really helpful, because what classroom design does, especially if you're talking about the physical arrangement, is it can provide clear boundaries. Boundaries for physical movement, but also boundaries for specific activities and transitions. So let's take a look at some of those. So this slide kind of tells you and shows you how boundaries can work, right? So we have some, on the left there, we have dots on the floor. Man, visual cues really help children. Visual cues can help that are physically apparent, can help children know what they're expected to do. So, for example, when you want them to line up, if you have something on the floor like this picture on the left, that would help the children, right? But then you see children doing some activity, it looks like maybe Play-Doh or clay. Well, look, they're not just doing it on the table, they're doing it on a tray, which creates a boundary, and boundaries are really important for kids. Then we have these two kids, maybe there's a third one back there, yep, who are playing, it looks maybe during center time, and they're playing with the blocks and things, and there's tape on the ground. Nope, these blocks stay here, these blocks stay here. We want the children to kind of do their own play and have the freedom to do these things, but boundaries and these kinds of things can really help. Same thing with circle time, right? In the third or fourth picture on the right, you can see there are little mats. Maybe you don't have mats like that, but these boundaries can really help the child. And you can put tape on the floor, so a child knows from the day one, this is their spot. This is where they're supposed to be on during circle time. So boundaries can be very helpful to structure the environment for positive social interactions and can really help promote learning. So promoting engagement, I mentioned that a minute ago. So when we have a good classroom design, that allows the teacher to then be better at engaging the children. So the environment, the physical space needs to be appropriate, but then it's also about the activities. If a child loses interest in an activity, then the likelihood that a challenging behavior will occur goes up. So it's more likely that a challenging behavior will occur when the child isn't interested in what they're doing. So when you see that a child is losing interest, we want to prevent any kind of challenging behavior. So then we kind of re-engage them in the behavior, show them how to manipulate it, because it may be that the child just doesn't understand what they're supposed to do. It may not be the actual activity, it may be their skills, their abilities are preventing them from it being engaged. So, and we're talking about really young children. So sometimes they're going to lose interest. And so anything that you can do to actively promote engagement in an activity, engagement in interaction with others is going to help reduce the likelihood of a challenging behavior. So the more positive comments that we make, describe what we're supposed to be doing during the activity, is going to help engage the child. Because if a child is engaged in an activity and enjoying it and getting feedback from the teacher, they're going to be less likely to engage in problematic behavior. So let's watch this video. This is a really good example of how we can engage children.
I was thinking we could have a drama party or a slumber party.
Oh, that sounds like fun. I used to have those when I was little.
What?
Pajama parties.
You?
Yeah, we'd have pizza and stuff, you know.
We used to have pizza. I had pizza at
The center?
Yep.
Is it from the pizza place or does a lady make it?
The lady make it. We was watching SpongeBob movie.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I didn't see that. How is it?
Great.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Can you tell me about the story? Because I don't know anything about it, because I don't have little kids at home to watch it. You all have to tell me what's going on.
Well, I'll tell you about the stuff eating.
Okay, go
and
ahead.
Toys.
What happened?
They are copying by the house area and the block area and the computer and writing area and
We don't have art now. Remember, that's our studio. Is that the after-school place you go to?
Yeah, and they got sand,
But
and they copy the doors we got.
but who's at the school?
This class.
Why?
Because I like it when Janelle was there, and Rita, and Miss Ellie.
Okay. So what do you do there? What do you do there?
Well, I can the stuff they got.
What do they got?
They got red, blue, green, and some more planks and bowls.
Yeah?
The same cups.
Yeah. Oh, so they don't use paper when they eat? They have regular cups and stuff?
For the house here.
Oh, they have the same ones as us?
Yeah.
So you can see that the teacher is very much engaged in conversation with this child. But not only is she engaged in a conversation and just asking questions, she is almost overdoing it, but she's making eye contact. Her facial expressions as the child is talking are animated, and so it's showing that the teacher is interested in what the child is doing. So if the child, and it's not even, I don't even know what they're doing. They're making, it looks like spider webs or something, but it's not even really about the activity that they're doing. It's engaging the child in interaction, and the more interactions and supportive, as we'll see, the more supportive interactions that the child has, the more learning that can occur. But this teacher is on the child's level, engaging her in conversations, asking, probing questions, not just, what are you doing? What color is that? But really asking her questions that develop her language, develop her understanding, and so this teacher does a really good job of that. And so the next thing that can help promote high quality environments is expectations, rules, routines, and schedules. Expectations, man, what we have these expectations when we enter in a classroom, how the children should be behaving. And so what we want to do is we want to teach them what the expectations are. I mentioned earlier that these kids come from all sorts of different environments. They don't necessarily have experience with what the rules or the expectations are within the classroom. And so we have to teach them how to behave. So that's where expectations, rules, routines, and schedules can be very helpful. When we know what to expect, we have a sense of feeling safe. And I use this example all the time because it's just a really good example. If I had two sets of kids, and out in their front yard, one set of kids in their front yard has a fence around the front yard. The neighbors do not have a fence, and they both live on a busy street. Who is more safe? Which child will think or feel that they are more safe? The kids without the fence or the kids with the fence? And so one of the things is if we feel a sense of safety, we are more likely to be engaged. We are more likely to know that we are safe. So that fence creates a boundary that keeps us safe, at least in our head. And so if there's a busy street, and then as parents, the parents might not want their children who don't have a fence to play in the front yard. Well, it's dangerous out there. The fence can give us that sense of safety. And just like that, designed classrooms can provide that sense of safety. Because we also know if the child knows what to expect at any given time, their feelings of distress or anxiety can be reduced. So knowing what to expect is very helpful. We all have experienced that when we go into a situation that we're not sure what's about to happen or how it's going to go, our anxiety level can be raised and we feel less safe. So if we can provide that sense of safety for the kids, we can it goes a long way to preventing problematic behaviors. So expectations are just general ways that we want the children to act. They're not necessarily rules. We'll talk about rules in a minute. But they apply to children. They apply to adults. We always forget, the rules are for the kids. No. The rules that we build are also for the teacher. And the teacher has expectations of how the children should behave. And the administration has expectations on how the teachers are supposed to behave. And so examples of expectations that might be when we enter into a classroom are being respectful, being safe, being a team player or a good friend, being polite, responsible, honest, friendly, peaceful. All of these things are positive experiences and positive expectations that we may have as we enter into a classroom. And so rules allow the children to meet those expectations that we set in the classroom. So rules are those things that we post and we physically say out loud, or we physically post on the wall, and we say out loud that are how we expect the children to behave in the classroom. So these rules help children make and meet the expectations in the classroom. And when you're building rules for your class, a couple of things to remember. One, you should only make 3 to 5 rules. So they should be relatively simple and few in number. They should be worded positively. And what that means is that we don't want to say no running, right? We don't want to say no hitting. No is a negative, right? With something that we don't want them to do. Because we want to create and promote positivity and warmth and caring within the classroom, we want to state our rules more positively. So instead of no running, one thing that we do is walking feet, right? You know, one time I saw a teacher, and this is probably not the best way to do that, is one of the rules that was posted on the wall was no talking. Huh. No talking. That's fairly hard to, you know, keep that rule in place, right? Not only for the kids, how do you learn without talking? But it's also hard for the teacher to model that kind of rule, because they would break it every minute of the day. So what the teacher intended was no loud talking, right? But that's still worded negatively. So we can say quiet voices or something along those lines. So it's really important for the teachers to also model whatever rules and expectations are set up in the classroom. We don't want a teacher who says use quiet voices to be sitting at a table and trying to address, even giving them positivity, you know, giving them positive feedback, but doing it from across the room, right? So, because then you have to kind of yell. Even that positive, you know, that positive feedback and praise, but if you're yelling across the room and one of your rules is quiet voices, you're kind of sending mixed signals for the children. So we want to model good rule following for the children. And another thing that we want to do is review the rules, especially from day one. Review the rules, go over the rules over and over and over and over and over again until the kids understand what the rules and expectations are. So we are reviewing and reviewing and reviewing. The children can't read, so even if you post them on the wall, they may not know how to read what that actually means. So we go over them again and again and again, and then we model those throughout the day. So here's an example of a classroom rules that you could have this chart in your classroom, you know, and it's few in number, so there are 5, but they're also stated positively: looking eyes, listening ears. I mentioned quiet voices, helping hands. We might need to explain what helping hands means, because there's a lot of information and a lot of social emotional learning that can occur, and that's built into that, to those 2 words: helping hands. Be a good friend, be pleasant, be polite. Walking feet I mentioned. So these are a really good example of different rules that you can set up in the classroom. And again, these rules are designed to keep the children safe, engage them, and can prevent problematic behavior in the classroom. So again, reviewing rules. We're constantly reviewing rules within the classroom, so that children can just have, the more that we hear something, the more it can become part of us. So it's important to review the rules. So here's an example of how we can review the rules.
Okay, let's do our classroom rules. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay. I need some helpers. Let me see. Sean, what's our first classroom rule? We use walking feet. Show me walking feet. Show me red. Where can you run? Diana, what's another classroom rule? Inside voices. Say hello. Really loud. Where can we use that voice? Outside. Say hello using the inside voice. Say hello. Deja, what's another classroom? What would be a gentle touch? A pat on the back. Very good. How
So this teacher is doing a really good job of not only reviewing the rules, what are the rules, right? But also explaining why we have those rules. She asked that one child, well, why are we like that? Why do we do that? So it's one thing to review the rules, but it's also one thing to explain why we do the rules. But another awesome thing that she did was she also had them practice the rules, right? So if we have helping hands, being polite, whatever it might be, they actually practice it. So she got them to do it. She got them to say, okay, well, what does running look like? And they all kind of got excited. And where do we run again, right? To give them those expectations. We run outside, right? Because it's okay to run, right? Because if we said no running as a rule, well, that would be problematic in two ways. One is it's stated negatively, but also there are times when we want the kids to run outside though. So she clarifies what those expectations and those rules are. So she does that. So it's not just about reviewing what the rules are, but it's really engaging the children in a higher level of understanding of what the rules are and how we can be flexible on those rules. Because if you want, she had them screaming. I'm sure one of her rules is quiet voices. So we can have some flexibility there. But reviewing the rules from the beginning of school, from the day one, will go a long way to addressing and preventing any kind of challenging behaviors that might occur. So schedules and routines help. Just like boundaries can help provide safety, so can schedules and routines. When a child knows what to expect in the classroom, what is coming next, it gives us predictability. Children love predictability. And so creating and teaching the daily schedule helps the children communicate. It helps communicate to the children that the organization of the day and activities. They know what to expect from 1 minute to the next. There's not these random transitions. There's not these random things. Routines also provide the structure to the day. So routines might be songs or rhymes or games or some sort of movement activity that we're doing that can foster communication. It can foster interaction and kind of community with the other kids and the teachers, but it can also help remind children of what the behavioral expectations are. So schedules will post on the wall, but routines are those things like brushing teeth. How do we do that? Within that one routine, we may have a time for brushing teeth. That's the schedule, but the routine itself is the routine of brushing teeth. So there's a step 1, a step 2, a step 3. We're teaching these things, and we're singing songs, or we have a rhyme, or we have some sort of way to communicate that. And all of these things, the reason why we have these routines is to provide expectation and predictability, but also it can, if you do it really well, it can help prevent problematic behavior. Now let's take a look at reviewing the schedule will assist and how that might look in the classroom.
Okay, have we arrived at school today?
Yes.
Have we done meet and greet?
Yes.
Have we done morning circle?
No.
We're going to do morning circle, we're going to do centers, and then what's this one?
Clean up.
Clean up, and what's this?
Rainy.
Rainy. We're going to do a rainy fun time activity inside the classroom. And then, this is a surprise because it's a rainy day. So we're going to do a surprise.
So she's just going over going over the schedule to help structure the day. Because if they know what's coming after, and we get into this good routine of after we come in and we hang our backpack up and we sit down for breakfast, and then after breakfast we move to the carpet to do circle time, and we do all of our activities during circle time, and then we transition to center time. If these happen consistently and they're constantly reviewed, that can go a long way to organizing that classroom, and the classroom will run more smoothly. Here are some examples of visual schedules, and it can, and some of them are flexible, right? So if you know that you're going to be going on a field trip or something, and you need to rearrange, this one on the right does look like you can change what activities are going to occur at what times. So having some flexibility will also help. We do want structure, we do want predictability, but having some flexibility in those things may also, as you get really good at organizing activities and organizing the classroom, may be helpful as well. So, so that's something that to consider as you go forward. So when we have a schedule and we have a routine, what's built into that are transitions between these things. So between circle time and then transitioning to centers may be also a focus of your organization. So when you're organizing your classroom, I really encourage you to really think long and hard about the transitions that you're going to do, because the research suggests that poor transitions can kickstart problematic behaviors. And oftentimes poor transitions result in confusion, frustrations, and will promote challenging behavior, which is actually the opposite of what you want to do. Transitions are the time when challenging behaviors come up the most. When you look at the frequency and the intensity of challenging behaviors, oftentimes it's because of a transition that's either about to take place or currently taking place. I don't want to move from center time. I'm having too much fun. Teachers can apply a variety of strategies to help children make smooth, independent transitions. So transitions are really, really important. One of the worst transitions I ever experienced while I was doing an observation was one in which the teachers were moving the children from the classroom to the playground. Actually, they had already transitioned out into the playground, and so now it was time to go back in for lunch. And so the strategy that the teachers used was on the surface, a good strategy because it was trying to promote warmth and caring between teacher and child. So what the teachers, there were two of them, there was a lead teacher and an assistant, and what they would do is they would go find a child on the playground and escort individually that child to the door into the classroom. So the expectation was the child was to stand in line, but it wasn't really communicated to the child. So the teacher would go, put a child in front of the door, go off and try to retrieve another child. But what happened was that as the teacher came back, the child that they originally put in front of the door was gone because they had gone back out to the playground. So it was this constant retrieving, re-retrieving, moving, and it just didn't work. The transition took forever. It took 15 to 20 minutes for those children to come from the playground to get back into the classroom. On the surface, it seemed like, oh, that might be a good idea. But the children didn't understand the transition. They didn't understand the routine. And so what happened was that it took a long time. The children didn't follow directions, which can be interpreted as not following directions. But I think it was more of a teacher and how they structured that transition more so than it was a kid creating challenging behaviors. If the teachers used a different strategy, perhaps they would have less challenging behavior, more following of directions. And so transitions are something that you really have to plan and think about.
We're going to get those sprayers out and spray.
So here is an example of a transition and an activity that the teacher came up with to really help the children in transitions.
If I pay, I'll go to the students.
I did long slide, the long one.
Well, we'll see. Okay, I gotta find it first. And in the computer, there's going to be Grandma and me on the computer.
And what about we had that this?
Right, we gotta make it all the way around. Pass round and round. Round it goes. And where it stops, nobody knows. Okay. What are you going to do today, Victoria? Round and around. What will you do today? You want that. I want that. What would you like to do? Only use your finger to point. I'm going to take them off. 3 tables, a soup fridge. What else?
And have snack.
And computer. And one more.
And I'm going to be
Science Center. Science Center. Good girl. Give me 5. Give me 5, Darian.
So she uses this hula hoop to help with transitions. Now this is a small set of kids, and so that might not work for larger sets of kids. But strategies like that, I loved it. She moved it around, and the kids were engaged. There was a little piece of red tape on there, and when it got to that child, it was their turn to choose what center. So it was an organized approach to transitioning from one activity to another. Here's another example of how we can transition from one activity to another, and perhaps in a larger group.
slow?
No.
That's fast?
Yeah.
Oh, how do we move slow?
This.
Please follow Miss Karen. And we're going to move very slowly, like butterflies. Beautiful. We're going to fly to the door. Outside. Everybody flew to the door. Very nice. Where are you?
So this teacher used motion to, calm and engage the children to transition from one thing to another. It was a whole class, it's a larger group, and she used our movements in a quiet voice to get the children to line up. And so it was a really good way to engage the children and to let them know and to help them transition. So some tips on transitions. What we want to do is we want to provide whole class warnings before a transition happens. So if the children are at center time, we want to let them know, okay, guys, you have 5 minutes before we have to go and put up our things, or even 5 minutes before we have to move centers. If you want to build in that structure where they don't stay in one center the whole time. So providing whole class warnings prior to a transition can help. Develop transition games, songs, or other kinds of things to ensure all children are actively engaged in the transition. So we have to actively do that. So like this teacher used her arms to fly like a bird very slowly. She changed her tone of voice. All of these things can help with that. But you may have to teach the steps and expectations for transitions early on in the school year. And you can provide positive and specific feedback to children who transition appropriately. And then if necessary, provide individual prompts like verbal cues or visual cues to children who may have difficulty during transitioning. But we want to actively engage as many, hopefully all students in the transition, even though they may be waiting. And if we can keep waiting times to a minimum, you're going to have more success in the transitions. So the quicker the transition and the more smoothly the transition goes, less challenging behavior. So that kind of ends that part about high quality environments. Next, we'll move on to responsive and supportive teachers. So teachers do have a critical role in preventing challenging behaviors. And so one of the things that this is going to really highlight is building positive relationships. It's so super important. When you build positive relationships and have good teacher and child interactions, the children feel more safe. They know what to expect, but you can also teach them more well-developed social emotional skills. So in early childhood settings, each moment that the teachers and the children interact with one another is an opportunity to develop both positive relationships, but also good social emotional skills. So if you think about social emotional skills, and I mentioned this earlier, challenging behaviors, one of the driving forces behind challenging behaviors is emotional dysregulation. Usually when there are emotional, challenging behaviors, we have this emotional response. And so it's important for teachers to have positive relationships and to develop good interactions because it can help the children to develop emotional regulation skills. And so teachers, it's important for them to use developmentally and individually appropriate strategies that take into consideration differing needs of the children. And so, for example, young children, infants, some of you will be working with really young children. And so teachers need to take time to respond to their cries and other signs of distress. That builds that positive relationships, makes them feel safe, even though they can't tell us they feel safe. There's an emotional development that occurs when teachers do that. So teachers can let children know that they care about them through warmth, responsive physical contact, such as pats, hugs, holding the child in their laps. All of these things can go a long way to start to build those relationships. But for preschool children, older children, teachers can encourage mutual respect between both the teacher and the child, but also the other kids in the room. So for example, if a child is speaking, just like in the video that we saw, the teacher waited for the child to finish what she was saying to then respond, right? So if we wait until a child finishes asking questions before answering them, even though we probably know what the answer is, then we can encourage the children. That encourages them to listen to others without interrupting. So we're just modeling these kinds of behaviors. When we model these kinds of behaviors, they have more success. So here's an example of how we can do it with even young kids, and we develop these positive interactions and positive relationships.
Oh, get it. Oh, it's hard. It's hard when you're tired. I know. Oh, baby. Oh. That's rough. Big day. It's been a big day. Let's see if we can get a quiet toy for you. Oh, here. Here's your baby. We're just getting tired.
So we see in this video that the child is getting kind of fussy, and so the teacher is providing warm, supportive speech. She's gently handling the baby, right? So that it's not like she's, real aggressive or come on, just be quiet and trying to bounce the child so the child will stop crying. But she's also speaking with, oh, it's okay, using very soft language, addressing the child. That infant probably doesn't understand what she's saying or anything like that, but it's more about the emotional connection that she's trying to communicate. Let's watch another one, a little bit older child, and watch how the teacher interacts with her.
Who is that? Who is that baby? Oh, want to kiss Ashlyn again? Oh, okay. Okay, you can kiss Ashlyn. Oh, you're so nice. Kissing the baby. What? What is it? Whose face is it? Where's Ashlyn's eyes? Where's Ashlyn's eyes? Where's Ashlyn's eyes? There's her mouth. There's her mouth. There's Ashlyn's mouth.
Mira el osito. Wow. Mira cómo él está muy contento.
So even though that child, again, doesn't have a whole lot of language, the teacher is, talking with the child, showing and developing these emotional connections. And that's going to go a long way as the child gets older, to understanding that warm, positive relationships are necessary for social emotional, to get their social and emotional needs met. And so we do that through interaction. We talk to children, even though they don't understand what we're saying, we still talk to them to develop those kinds of skills, even at early ages. So let's take a look at a older set of kids. And how we can develop turn taking, for example, and to show them we're actually teaching. Earlier I said when the children don't know how to behave, we teach. Well, this teacher is doing just that.
So then Shimmy can have a turn with his white card. Maddox is done, and now Shimik's turn to push it.
What about that one?
Shimik pushes.
What color is that?
There you go.
You know?
Down and down it goes. There it goes. Now it's Maddox's turn. Whose turn is it? Jude's turn, then Aiden gets another turn. Jude gets to push it. Yeah, but you have to let those go if you want them to fly out. Now it's Eamon's turn. Push them with your cheek, and then Jude gets another turn, okay? There you go. There we go. Eamon's turn.
Let's see. Beautiful. Oh, nice and clean.
Ready? There you go. Now it's Jude's turn, that's right. Go ahead, Jude. Now whose turn is it? Right. Wow, Shimmy. You're perfect. From here.
So what we saw in that video is a teacher who was sitting very close to the children. She's talking to them in a warm, positive way, and she's giving them instruction. Okay, here's how we take turns. Let me show you. Is it your turn? Is it your turn? At one point, the two boys in the back, can you imagine 4 boys in the same area without a lot of yelling and fighting? It's partially because of the expectations and the warmth that the teacher has communicated, I'm sure. but those two boys in the back kind of started getting a little, and she intervened, right? And said, oh, well, let's take turns. Whose turn is it? And she's teaching them how to interact. It's not something that they're going to necessarily learn on their own. And sometimes these things need to be taught, and she did a good job of that. So some things to remember when we're trying to engage children and to be supportive teachers. Try to engage them in one-on-one interactions. Get on the child's level, so get to their level. When you're addressing a child, get down on your knees and talk with the child. Don't stand over the children. If you go back to the video of the kind of chaotic classroom, the teacher was standing over and yelling at the child, "Don't hit me, don't hit me." And so her voice was not calm, and she was not a very pleasant teacher. She was having a very bad day, I suspect. But she was not using face-to-face interaction. So that is another strategy. But also providing warm and responsive physical contact can be very helpful in terms of preventing these kinds of things and just presenting yourself as a responsive and supportive teacher. So because what these interactive, if you model good interactive skills between teacher and child, that's going to help with the child's understanding of moving from, oh, this is how I interact with adults, well, then that's going to be how I need to interact with the other kids in the classroom. So children who develop and learn, they'll do it in terms of relationships. They learn it in terms of the context of the relationship. So a trusting and caring teacher-child relationship is essential for the child's development, but it also allows them to ask questions, solve problems, try new tasks, express how they're thinking, and they can that then translates and transfers to how they interact with other kids. So other things that you can do to prevent, try to be in a this is if we are good supportive teachers, children then learn social and emotional skills. They become more socially and emotionally healthy. And what the kids who are more socially and emotionally healthy, who do they look like? Well, they have a better attitude. They have a more positive mood. They're more aware of directions and expectations, so they can then listen and follow those directions. They tend to have close relationships with their caregivers and peers. They care about their friends. They show interest. They recognize and label and can manage their own emotions. So that's really important. If you can understand and look at a child and know that they're emotionally healthy, they're going to understand the emotions of others and can show empathy. They might express their wishes better. They can gain access to ongoing play and group activities in an appropriate way. These are all things, man, it sounds like the perfect child, a child who's always in a good mood, who always listens, and who interacts well with other kids. When is there a time for them to engage in a challenging behavior? That's the reason why we do this, and that's the reason why we have responsive and supportive teachers. As I mentioned, that's not just, oh, that's all good, well and good. there's research to back that. So research indicates that children who are more mentally healthy, both socially and emotionally, tend to be happier, show greater motivation to learn, have a more positive attitude towards school and in school. They are more eager to participate in class, and they demonstrate higher academic performance. Oh man, again, that sounds like a perfect child. So if we can really harness some of these strategies, we're going to prevent challenging behavior, but more importantly, we're going to show and assist with the higher academic performance and learning of these kids, which is ultimately why you are a teacher, trying to teach these children. Okay, so I'm going to move on from here. I'm running shorter on time, so I'm going to just kind of skip those. So other ways that we can help children is teaching them problem-solving skills. Just like in that video, the teacher is teaching the children how to interact with each other, teaching them sharing. So engaging children in generating solutions to problems can be very helpful. So we were posting reminders on the wall, reminders showing them how to problem solve can be very helpful. Because problem solving skills, or a lack thereof, are a way that creep up or increase the likelihood that a challenging behavior will occur. If a child doesn't know how to solve the problem, that instills anxiety, but it also can lead to a challenging behavior. So let's see how this teacher does that.
Oh, Milana, there's no spaces available right now. I know. Are you feeling disappointed? Yeah, it's not a choice right now, though, because it's all full.
Pizza cutter.
There's the pizza cutter. What else could you do?
What do you want? What do you want?
I know you really want to play that, Milana. I see computers are open, and hand tables open. It's not a choice right now, Milana, because look, it's all full. Should we ask some other people for a solution? See if anybody else has an idea of what to do? Here, Taylor, come on over here. We have a problem. See, Milana really wants to play here, and all the areas. A good solution? Can you think of what she could do?
I could.
What do you think she could do?
I could show you one of these persons.
She could share a hook with you? Did you hear that? Helen said you could share hooks with her, so that would be okay. We have one more person over here. Yours? Helen, way to go. I never would have thought of that. But you guys can share that. Boy, look at Milana's face. You made her happy.
So this teacher does a really good job of problem solving, teaching with the child, right? Rather than telling the child, nope, you can't go in there, go find something else to do, she said, what might be a solution to that problem? And the child couldn't really come up with anything. So then what she did was develop social skills by pulling another child in. Hey, do you have an idea of what she could do to maybe solve this problem? Because she wants to play here, but it's full. Because see, we have our organized classroom design. We only have 4 kids who are allowed in this area. And so then they came up with it, and another child came in and provided solutions to the problem that seemed to work for everybody. The teacher was using, she was in close proximity. She was using warm, attentive communication skills. She was on the child's level. So she's doing all these things to help with problem solving skills. So we actually have to teach these things rather than just saying, nope, that's not available, move on to the next thing. Because guess what that solution is going to engage? That's going to engage a challenging behavior. Maybe the child might tantrum. So we facilitate this through conversation, through learning, through problem solving, can really go a long way to prevent challenging behaviors. But we also, what's part of that is developing emotional literacy, having a child understand what it means to feel angry. So we're talking about the emotions, we're labeling the emotions, and so we are using a variety of strategies to teach the children how to deal with these emotions. So using a variety of strategies can help the children recognize the emotions in themselves, but also recognize those emotions in others. So once we tell a child, oh, you're happy, it validates that emotion, but it allows them and gives them an idea, literacy, if you will, of what it's supposed to feel like when you're happy or even when you're frustrated. So telling a child, hey, you're feeling frustrated right now, allowing them to talk about those feelings and then helping them problem solve and managing. It's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay to get mad. We all feel that way. But when we start to talk about that, providing the children with emotional literacy skills and emotional intelligence, if you will, we can provide strategies on how to calm down, how to emotionally regulate those feelings. So and it's going to have to be for each individual child. They may have to have a different strategy. So we have to individualize our instructions to meet the developmental needs of all of these children. But so when a child is engaging in an emotion, we want to tell them about it. We want to show them. We want to have them express it, have them talk it out. Those will help validate, and then we can teach them strategies to overcome, especially if they're feelings that don't make us feel good, like anger or sadness or something like that. Another way that we can do it, though, it's very difficult to teach a child how to emotionally regulate when they're in a state of emotional dysregulation. So if a child is tantruming, that's probably not the time to start to try to teach them to calm down. We've already missed the boat, right? So if we're going to be teaching kind of self-regulation, self-management skills, then we want to do that when they're calm. And we can do that through things called scripted stories. There's a lot of different scripted short stories. I'm going to give you a list in just a second. But what scripted stories are designed to do is to teach the children about emotions and about interactions while they're calm, while they're not engaged in any kind of dysregulation. So scripted stories provide a script for the child about social situations and emotions. The story is written from the child's perspective typically, and it includes descriptive and perspective, like let's take on the perspective of this individual who is in this problem, and then gives them solutions to specific problems. The stories often match the child's symbolic and representative and receptive language skills, and so it can be really helpful to facilitate these things. So if we're talking about emotions, not while the emotions are occurring, although that can be helpful too, but if we're doing it prior to, at a learning time, when they're engaged in learning, man, it'll go a long way for them to develop social emotional skills. And so this is an example of one called Tucker Turtle. Take a listen.
Tucker Turtle takes time to tuck and think. Tucker Turtle is a terrific turtle. He likes to play with his friends at Wet Lake School. Have a seat. Have a seat. Have a seat. Who's his friends?
Tell me who his friends are.
Tell me who his friends are.
The crocodile.
Okay, and who's this?
Okay, and who is this?
The owl.
The owl, you are right. But sometimes things happen that can make Tucker really mad. Can you show me a mad face? When Tucker got mad, he used to hit and kick or yell at his friends. His friends would get mad or upset when he would hit, kick, or yell at them. How would that make you feel?
Would that make you sad?
It would make me sad too.
Tucker
now knows a new way to think like a turtle when he gets mad. We're going to stop. Show me stop. Stop. Pull in your shell. Okay, and then count. 1, 2, 3. Take a deep breath.
I have a question.
And then
Can I tell you something, Miss Christie? He can't come out.
Brandon's is, look, Brandon's is coming out. And what is your turtle going to do, Brandon?
He's gonna go.
He's going to think of a good way. Good job, Brandon. You remember to think like a turtle.
So Tucker Turtle is just an example of a scripted story. And so it provides the children with almost like a script, right? Like, okay, what am I supposed to do in this situation? There's an A, a B, and a C. There's a beginning and a middle and an ending. And so it teaches them about emotions, but it also teaches them how to deal with those. It's a problem-solving technique. And so if we incorporate this into our classroom, when a child is engaging in or you can kind of see the precursor to a challenging behavior, then you can address it. Oh, what would Tucker Turtle do in this situation? So it can be very helpful. And here is a list of different children's books that can help teach social and emotional skills. So there's websites that have Tucker Turtle. You can, I don't know where you get those finger puppets from, but here are some other ones that you might be able to locate and purchase for your classroom. These can be very helpful to demonstrate what it might feel like to get angry, but then what also are the problem-solving skills to help develop these social, emotional, and regulation skills. Okay, so now we are at a break. So this is the time in the video where the moderators of the presentation may want to push pause on the video, take as long of a break as you would like, and then we can come back and I will finish up with management strategies. Okay, so as I spent most of the time so far talking about preventative strategies, because I think those are to some degree easier to do because it doesn't really have anything to do with the child. It really has more to do with the teacher and setting up a good classroom environment, providing a nurturing relationship. And so I'm going to talk about management strategies because there are times when preventing behavior just doesn't work, because preventing behavior is our ultimate goal, but we cannot prevent all challenging behavior in the classroom. And so what do we do when a challenging behavior occurs? So that's what we're going to talk about going forward. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there are numerous approaches to addressing challenging behavior in the classroom, and no one single strategy is going to be perfect. And so at times we're going to have to adapt our strategies and adopt different strategies, or maybe even a number of strategies to address a specific concern. And so, so these are some ways of addressing challenging behaviors, but it's not the end-all be-all. So there's generally, if we want to change a behavior that is challenging, that disrupts the child's ability to learn, disrupts the other children's ability to learn, and impacts in a negative way their ability to develop social and emotional skills, then we want to go ahead and target those behaviors and try to change them. And so there's generally 5 steps. We want to define what the behavior actually is, determine the purpose of the behavior. We want to take a look at our environment. Remember, because if we're going to try to prevent it, maybe there's something in the environment that we're not doing that is contributing to the challenging behavior. So is something in the environment, can we make changes to that? And then we want to use appropriate change techniques. And then if necessary, if we go back to our pyramid, the very top is interventions, really intense interventions. Well, that's where we're going to try to seek consultation. So let's take a look at step number 1. We want to define what the specific behavior is. As I mentioned, we don't want to try to have the perspective that that behavior is bad, the child is bad, and we don't want to list it that way. Oh, they're being bad. Well, what are they doing to be bad? So we have to be specific. We have to use terms like hitting, kicking, crying, screaming. We define the specific behavior that is problematic. And then we want to understand how that behavior is occurring. So what is the behavior, but we also have to understand what the ABCs are. So this is kind of the ABC model of understanding behavior. A stands for antecedent. I like to think of it as a trigger. This is what occurs right before the behavior. And so it might be during instruction, it might be something environmental, it might be something physiological. And so it's the trigger, it's the antecedent, the A. The B is the actual behavior, right? So our response to the antecedent. So B, the behavior. What is the behavior? Is it kicking? Is it hitting? Is it crying? Is it laughing? And so then we have the consequence, right? C, what happens after? So what occurs immediately after that response? Does the child get reinforced? Do they get feedback? So on and so forth. So here are some examples of ABC, right? So the antecedent, a young child may be hungry, so that child may cry. And what's the consequence of that cry? Getting a bottle and getting fed. So the crying is there. It's just a behavior, right? So if I'm late for work, that might be a trigger. So I might engage in a behavior that's dangerous and whatnot, is speeding, right? Now, if I so happen to speed and get caught, then I might receive a ticket. So that might be the consequence of my speeding. Then another consequence might be that I get to work on time. So sometimes in a situation there are both kind of positive outcomes and negative outcomes. And so one that we might see in the classroom is one trigger might be a child sees a toy. A behavior might be that the child takes a toy or hits, just like we saw in that one video where that little boy was grabbing that girl's hair, right? So the child saw the toy, he wanted the toy, so he hits his peer, and then what is the consequence? He gets the toy, the ABC model. And so what happens is how does a behavior continue to happen in the environment? Well, we call that reinforcement. Reinforcement is any stimulus or event that that triggers a response, and then what happens after that response? If what happens after that response increases the likelihood that behavior will continue, well, then we call that reinforcement. So an example is if a child does well in school and their parents say, okay, if you get an A in this class, you'll get $20, whatever. Well, that $20 acts like a reinforcement because the parents are trying to get them to continue to get A's in school. It's called a token economy. We see this in elementary schools, right? So gold stars. So a child who is every day doing well in terms of their behavior gets a gold star at the end of the day. If they get 5 gold stars at the end of a week, well, then they can pull something out of the treasure box. That's a reinforcement schedule, that we're trying to reinforce positive behaviors. The alternative to reinforcement is punishment. That's any event or object that, when following a response, makes that response less likely to happen. In the Head Start classroom, we cannot do punishment. So any ways that we're trying to change behavior have to be reinforcement-based and not punishment-based. And so when we go look at the strategies, you'll never see a punishment because we're not going to punish these children. We're going to reinforce them. So we have to think about that as we develop our strategies. So when we define the behavior and understand what the triggers might be, and understand what the behavior is, and then we understand what the consequences are, then we can say, well, then why would that child do that? So we need to determine the purpose or the function. That's another word, the function of the behavior. And so if you go back, all behavior is communication. So another way to say that is, what is the child communicating? So what's the purpose of the behavior? And another way to say that is, what's the function? Why? What is the outcome the child is seeking? Why are they doing it? And so that takes some thought. It takes some time to think about those things. Because generally the functions of behavior are to get something or to avoid something, right? It could be to get attention or to avoid attention, depending. It could be to get a specific item, that's what we call a tangible, or to avoid a specific item. Sometimes we do things to get or avoid sensory stimulation, right? So sometimes we might avoid a loud noise because we don't like it. And so there are basically 4 functions to all of behavior. The reason why children do things is to get or avoid something. And so it could be to avoid an activity, it could be to get something, get food, it could be for attention. So let's take a look at some examples. So Devin, a 3-year-old, hits the teacher and says no when given a puzzle to complete. The teacher removes Devin from the table and places him in a chair away from the group. So take a moment and try to determine what is the function of this. Okay, so for those that said escape, that's right. The Devin is hitting or saying no because he doesn't want to complete the puzzle. So he's trying to escape that activity. Let's try another one. Timothy cries when the teacher is passing out popcorn and accidentally skips him. The teacher quickly gives him some popcorn. So what is the function of this behavior? First, what is the behavior? Well, it might be the crying, right? So we've identified what the behavior is. What is the function? What's the purpose? To get a tangible. He wanted popcorn, so he cried. Now this is an interesting point where we can talk about reinforcement. So Timothy cried when the teacher is passing out the popcorn. And so what did the teacher do? Is gave into the crying and gave him popcorn. And it was, that's typically what will happen, is that if a child fusses about something, the teacher will quickly try to fix it. But in one way, the teacher is actually reinforcing the crying. She's reinforcing that. What that means is that she kind of rewarded him for crying, right? So he cried, even though it was her mistake. But one way to kind of teach more pro-social behavior is to teach Timothy that crying doesn't get his wants and needs met, but using pro-social behavior. So instead of just giving in and giving him the popcorn, say, oh, Timothy, we don't cry when we want something. Just let me know. Tell me, hey, teacher, you skipped me. Give him a replacement behavior. Not crying, but something that's functionally equivalent, meaning that it's going to do the same thing. So you tell, a teacher would tell Timothy, no, Timothy, we don't cry to get our wants and needs met. How about asking politely? Can we say please? And if the child says please, then we give in. So now we're reinforcing the use of pro-social behavior, the saying please, being polite. That's the way that we want to use reinforcement. Reinforce positive behaviors, not negative behaviors. Let's check out another example. Kashawn is playing during center time, walks toward the teacher, and hits her. The teacher responds by saying, no hitting, don't do that, or something along those lines. So what is the function of this behavior? And we have to define, what's the behavior? Hitting the teacher. What's the function? Perhaps the function is attention. Maybe Kashawn wanted to have an interaction with the teacher and wanted attention from the teacher. Well, instead of doing it in a positive way, maybe we do see kids who will seek attention in a more negative way. So now we kind of know what the function of Kashawn's behavior is. So if you want, might take out your cell phone and take a snapshot of this. This is just both preventative and management strategies for the different types of function for behavior. And so we have preventative strategies. We also have some teaching strategies. So if you notice a child is engaging in some unwanted behavior, how do we teach this? What are some of the strategies that might go into that? So for example, for Timothy, who was crying, right, he wanted something. And so we had to teach him to request the items in a more pro-social way. So that's where those teaching strategies come in. And so then the management strategies are those that provide access to the items following an appropriate behavior. So if you want, like I said, take a snapshot of this, and this is just some strategies how we would address behavior that have certain functions, either attention, escape or avoidance, or obtaining items like tangibles or toys or something like that. So let's moving on to step 3. So we need to assess the environment. And so what we looked at, so if we have already set up a really good environment, so we have really good classroom design, we have a really solid schedule, and we have solid rules that we've, reviewed with the children over and over and over again, sometimes that doesn't always prevent challenging behaviors. So then we have to take a step back and say, okay, what changes can the teacher make to continue to prevent the problem, right? So the problems are occurring, but are there things that we can do to changing routines, schedules, the room arrangement to help? So for example, if you notice that 2 little boys are constantly kind of fighting and being disruptive, are there things that we can do to change that? Maybe we change the room arrangement a little bit. The room arrangement was designed to prevent those kinds of things, but we're noticing that these 2 little guys are fighting and cutting up. One thing that you might want to do to prevent that from going forward is to move one child, just that separate them. That's how we assess the environment. Is there something in the environment that's causing this to continue? And so once we can make those, maybe there is a scheduling issue. We always have this problem after lunch with a child who is needs to run around. Is there a way to provide that child, and once we determine what the function of the behavior is, can we help the child to, and by modifying the schedule? Sometimes that will work and sometimes it won't, but that's what we're doing. We have to sit back and think, what is maintaining the behavior in the classroom? And so we can look at changing routines and schedules and room arrangement. But another thing that we can look at are teacher behaviors. So sometimes changing a teacher's behavior can have drastic effects on the child's behavior. And so when we're thinking about changing the environment, well, one of the things that are constant in these classrooms are the teachers, right? And so one of the things that we can do is change our own behavior. And so a teacher has to respond and not react to certain behavioral challenges that occur. The teacher must remain in their own, when it says in control, not in a like I'm the teacher and I'm going to control all the children. No, the teacher has to control themselves, right? And so they have to learn how to control their own reactions and their own experiences with these challenging behaviors. Part of that may be staying positive. Part of that is to listen to the child, both with your ears, but also with your emotional skills, right? Really, what is going on with this child? Why are they behaving in the way that they are? Listen to the behavior. Understand reading the child's body language is really important as well. So you're not listening with your ears necessarily, but you're reading and listening to the child's body language. Maintaining maneuverability, right? So being able to flex and where you are located in the room can also be helpful. So we're going to take a look at those. So when we are addressing challenging behaviors, we also have to think about it in terms of our own reaction to it. Typically, challenging behaviors will stir in us negative feelings, so anger, frustration, and so what we have to do, though, is if we react to the challenging behavior with yelling, "Stop that!" and that's something that becomes a pattern of behavior, we need to look at that and maybe make some modifications. So we want to try to respond to a behavioral issue more so than react, because when we're responding, we're doing it in a controlled way. We are calmly and without anger responding to the issue. And so if you can keep your emotions in check, you are modeling keeping those emotions in check in the children. So you are modeling behavior. So if there's something that irritates you, if you can keep under control, you are actually helping promote that in the classroom. Sometimes a repeated behavior can make us really, really upset. So sometimes we need to take a couple of minutes on our own to calm down before we even respond to what the problem is. So maybe you call on the assistant teacher to say, "Hey, can you come and do that? I need a second because I'm about to lose my cool here. I'm going to go and I just need a second to calm down, and then I can address the issue." Your response will provide a learning opportunity for the kids. And so that's when, if you need to develop your own kind of chill strategy, and that can be helpful. So, if it's taking time away, if it's whatever it might be. But if your stress level is too high, you're going to be a less effective teacher, and you're going to be less able to respond to the children, and there's going to be more reactions. Let's see. So another management strategy is to notice positive behaviors. We want to notice positive behaviors in the children that are kind of more likely to engage in challenging behaviors. So those kids that might need a little bit more attention in terms of their emotional regulation skills. So when that child is engaging in pro-social behavior, we want to acknowledge that. That will reinforce, going back to reinforcement, acknowledging positive behavior that they're doing will certainly go a long way to promoting that more often in the child. So you might say something like, "That was a very nice way of sharing with your classmate. Thank you so much." Those kinds of things, if a child is wanting attention, if that's a function of their behaviors oftentimes, then we want to give the attention to the child in a positive way. So noticing the child when they are doing something positive lets that child know that you respect them and that you acknowledge that their behaviors and that they can do something good. Keeping positive. Because children seek praise from adults, by reinforcing them using praise, that can be helpful. But another management strategy would be is if a child is starting to engage in challenging behaviors that are being disruptive, noticing positive behaviors in other children will be helpful as well. So what I mean is if a child who is maybe not transitioning appropriately, right? You may say, "Oh, I really liked how this other child, I really liked how Sally moved from the center to the carpet. I really like children who do that." So you're not really addressing the challenging behavior per se in the child who's not transitioning very well, but you're addressing it in someone else, kind of almost socially trying to promote what the expectations are. Noticing positive behavior in the children who are engaging in more chronic, challenging behavior, but also noticing positive behavior and praising positive behavior in the children that are doing what they're supposed to do. And this is all a way of showing and staying positive, right? Showing excitement and enthusiasm when the child does something well. We want to keep doing that. So encourage the children to increase the frequency of appropriate behavior by showing them what it means to be excited and enthusiastic about what's going on in the classroom. So some other strategies that we can use to manage behavior. We're going to talk about redirecting of behavior, allowing for choices, all of these things, and then teaching alternative behaviors. All of these things will help manage these behaviors, these challenging behaviors that will occur in the classroom. So redirection is a proactive teaching strategy used to address challenging behaviors before it can escalate to something that might turn into something more like if it's aggression. If we can see the precursor to it, man, we need to intervene. So redirecting allows a teacher to guide the children to engage in more pro-social behaviors or alternative behaviors that are more acceptable. So we have to teach them how to do that, and it can be done through simple cues or embedding them in teachable moments. So this is why it would be really important to talk about how we interact with others and talk about the rules, do scripted stories to help guide the children to more acceptable behavior. So we're doing it on the front end, but sometimes we have to do it as the behavior is occurring. So we want to use teaching strategies that use a combination of other strategies. So we're going to say, hey, remember, we have these rules and hitting is not part of these rules. That doesn't fall in line with helping hand. So we're always referencing back to those. So we're redirecting, but also clearly stating what the expectations are. So we're kind of combining both preventative and management strategies. So directing is important because it can help re-engage a child into the activity. And so you can help maximize learning time. By maximizing learning time for all kids, they will all, it almost acts as though it is a distraction method, right? So we're re-engaging them in the activity. It increases their time for learning, but it can also help with all the children by distracting from specific challenging behaviors. And we can redirect in a number of ways. And really there are 4 types of redirection that are most commonly used in preschool. So verbal redirection, right? This is when a teacher gives an instruction which distracts a child from challenging behavior and directs them to a more appropriate activity. And it's verbal, right? So we tell the child, Timmy, you're not allowed to do that, and we give them that verbal. So we're talking to them. We may go over to them, get on their level, use a warm and supportive voice, and let them know that that's not appropriate. So we're giving them an instruction. So that verbal cue can help them and redirect them into a more appropriate activity. Then we have physical redirection, right? So a teacher physically prevents a child from engaging in a challenging behavior and redirects them to an alternative behavior or activity. So that means let's say that there's some 2 little guys are starting to kind of get into it. So you may want to position yourself in between the 2 children, right? And then begin to teach them, problem-solving strategies. So you physically redirect. So you're in between them and you physically redirect them to more appropriate behavior. Another physical redirection is if a child is engaging in, let's say they're throwing blocks or something. We may just walk over there and put our hand on their shoulder. If we've done a good job of explaining what the classroom rules are and the classroom expectations are, perhaps all the child needs is a physical reminder that they're not engaging in appropriate behavior. So we put our hand on their shoulder, right? Perhaps that's what all they need to redirect them from their challenging behavior. So redirecting with a cue, it could be physical, it could be visual, it could be a gesture, right? So a visual cue maybe, sometimes we put our finger over our mouth to indicate to be quiet. That's a visual cue. And that's actually a gesture as well. So we're gesturing to be quiet. Another visual cue, maybe if you want in the classroom, maybe you kind of notice, the volume in the classroom is getting a little bit too loud. And I had teachers do this when I was in grade school. They would go and turn off the lights. Oh, something's different. It's a cue for redirection. And then you combine it, right? You can combine it with a different cue. Redirecting with a cue. Turn off the lights in a calm, soft voice. Tell everybody this is a verbal redirecting. Okay, guys, we're a little bit too loud. We're a little bit too loud. Turn the lights back on, and then we can resume. And you do that as many times as you need. So it's not just a matter of doing one redirection strategy. It can be done in concert. So you're giving verbal redirecting and visual or gestural cues. We can redirect attention, right? So that's a way to positively model a child's proximity. Or you draw your attention to something nearby, right? So let's say two kids are fighting over a ball, right? Which is a challenging behavior. Well, one way is to redirect attention to something else. So you give the child something else to do. So let's say that you find another ball that is reasonable, right? So they are fighting over a soccer ball. You actually have two soccer balls in the classroom. So you go retrieve that ball and now both children have the ball. Redirection. We're redirecting attention from one item, the ball, to another item. Maybe you can do that to another activity. But that activity and that item that you're trying to substitute and redirect attention toward has to be the same, right? So what I mean by that is has to have the same function. So if the child doesn't want to, if you're trying to redirect attention to a different activity and that child doesn't want to do that activity, well, then that's not going to work very well. So we have verbal redirecting, we have physical redirecting, we have redirecting with a cue, and then we have redirection of attention. So I had mentioned earlier that when we're trying to address the function of behavior, what we want to do is if a behavior has a specific function, for example, for attention purposes, then what we need to do is we need to teach them an alternative way to behave that's more pro-social, that's more acceptable. So we need to replace these old behaviors that work for the child with new behaviors that have the same consequences, right? So in general, new behaviors that replace old behaviors, and they do a good job of that when they are just as easier or easier to do. So if a child, rather than having a child scream, if the child doesn't want to do something, we can teach them to communicate, no, I need a break. That's much more acceptable than screaming. So if the child begins a tantrum because they don't want to do their work, we want to encourage that child to ask appropriately to escape the undesirable activity. So if the child acts appropriately, then they should be allowed to escape. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to teach the child an alternative to screaming. And we do that through conversation. We do that through warm interactions. But it has to be what they call functionally equivalent. So, for example, if I'm wanting a child to seek attention in an appropriate way, well, I'm not going to then give them something, right, which is more of the function is tangible. Maybe they're not seeking out something. They want my attention. So then giving them an activity that doesn't have anything to do with my attention won't work as well. So that's where functional equivalence comes in. We want to make sure that the replacement behavior equals the function of the challenging behavior. So we need to identify an acceptable way that the child can deliver the same message from a behavioral standpoint. Make the new response socially appropriate and allow the child the desired outcome. So teach the child a skill that honors the original function of the behavior. So if the child wants out of an activity, teach them to communicate that in a more acceptable way. Another way to manage that is to give children options, right? It's important to give a child a choice, but we also have to explain what the consequences of that choice might be. So, for example, I actually use this with my kids when they were coming up. You know, they wanted to eat dessert, right? And so we're sitting down for dinner, and they want dessert. And so what we did was we offered the children choices. So in order to access dessert, they had to eat their dinner. And so, but sometimes they didn't like what we provided for dinner. And so they would complain, right? Oh, I don't want to eat this. I don't want to eat this, but I want dessert. Well, so we would say, well, you can choose to eat your dinner, and then you would choose to have a dessert, right? Or you can choose not to eat your dinner, which is okay. I understand that you don't like it. I was allowing our children to kind of express their emotions. Right? I understand this is not a dish that you like. But if you choose not to eat your dinner, you're choosing not to get dessert. Oh, well, that's not fair. Well, why isn't it fair? All you have to do is eat your dinner. Then you can get a dessert. But you can't have dessert unless you eat your dinner. So it's allowing choices. And so my kids got really good at eating their dinner even though they didn't like it, because they wanted their desired outcome, that dessert. And it made it even harder, or it made it even more interesting when one of my kids would eat their dinner and get a dessert, but the other one still refused. Well, that's not on me, right? It kind of takes the adult out of it in terms of, well, you're not letting me have dessert. No. Oh, no. You can have dessert. I'm telling you, you can have dessert, but you have to eat your dinner. So in the same way, if a child refuses to do some work, you can tell them you can choose to do your work, and then you can choose whatever preferred activity that they want to do. Maybe they want to go play with Play-Doh, but right now they have this other activity that you guys are trying to accomplish. So you can do that. Or if you choose not to do your work, then you're choosing not to go play with Play-Doh. The choice is yours. Again, you're removing yourself. It's not a power struggle anymore. It's really putting the responsibility on the child. And that can be very powerful to manage those kinds of behaviors. Because when a child feels as though they have a say, that empowers them to some degree. So it's important to remember that. So using this technique teaches the child that the consequences of their behavior are a result of their own choices, rather than punishment by outside forces. I'm not punishing them for not eating their dinner. It's not a punishment. It's on them. So they can also, it helps facilitate emotional regulation, like self-control, by giving the child the ability to choose and respond how they want to. Although you're choosing what types of responses are appropriate and what are acceptable, right? Because then you get into the situation where, oh, well, what if I eat one Brussels sprout? Well, no, you have a plate that you need to finish what's on your plate, and we're not going to negotiate, right? That's not part of the process. But you can help them emotionally regulate by teaching these strategies. So some additional management strategies: planned ignoring. So sometimes when a child is engaging in behavior that has the function or the purpose of getting attention, well, then we can ignore it and then use redirecting to support more positive behavior. And so when the child does it, as you are ignoring certain behaviors but possibly providing some redirection, then if they engage in any kind of pro-social or positive behavior, then that's when you give them praise, and that's when you give them their attention. So planned ignoring can be helpful when the function is attention. Remember, don't take things personally. Typically, the behavior is not about you. It's how they've learned to communicate with adults and other children. And so it's not really about you. They're not doing it to get under your skin, And so if you can try to not take things personally, although that can be very difficult, you may have some more success in managing some of these behaviors. Going back to it, that would help you to respond to these behaviors rather than react to them. Maintain maneuverability, I mentioned earlier. So as you saw in a lot of these videos that I showed earlier, the teachers were within arm's length of the children. So as a challenging behavior starts to escalate, if we can cut it off at the early part, then we will have more success. The challenging behaviors won't be as intense. So maintaining your maneuverability and your close proximity to the children will allow you to intervene and redirect as necessary. And so changing your voice can also help. I mentioned turning off the lights when the volume gets too loud. When a child is engaging in loud screaming or something like that, perhaps changing your voice will also draw attention to, wait, there's some changes here. I'm kind of confused. And because what we typically do in social interaction is we match the behavior and the of the other person. So if a person, and you've done this, you've done this in arguments, if somebody starts to elevate their volume, well, you're going to elevate and match their volume. And so if you use a change in voice, that may have some effect on how the child changes their behavior. So we've covered a lot today, and what I want to do is just kind of go over challenging behavior. I want you to remember that challenging behavior has meaning for all of the children. If we can understand what the challenging behavior is, then we can, and why the child is doing it, what's the purpose behind it, we can and should address them. There are times when we can prevent certain behaviors, and that's using those preventative strategies to avert the potential for challenging behavior. So preventative strategies are designed to reduce the likelihood that any kind of challenging behaviors will occur. But then we use management strategies to handle the behaviors as they are occurring. And so I hope that these strategies in this presentation has been helpful for you in understanding, well, what's most important. I spent most of the time on preventative strategies. That's going to be your best bet. But using management strategies can help. One thing to remember, though, is that there are times when there are chronic, severe, challenging behaviors that you, as a teacher, may not be able to address fully. So that's where we seek consultation. There are administrators that you can contact to get in touch with behavioral interventionists that can help you to address some of these chronic kinds of things. So if you have problems that you're not able to address through use of preventative and management strategies, please, please, please seek out consultation. Thank you guys for your time, and until next time, we'll see you later.